The world didn't end with a bang for me. It ended with a whimper, a slow, agonizing grind to a halt. One day I was standing on top of a gleaming steel and glass tower, looking down at the city I had helped shape. The next, I was looking up at the cracks in a rented ceiling, a bottle of cheap whiskey my only companion. My name is Daniel, and at 52, I learned what it meant to be truly alone. For 30 years, I was Daniel Sterling, the architect. My firm, Sterling & Associates, was a name whispered in the halls of power, a symbol of sleek design and bold innovation. We built skyscrapers that scraped the clouds, cultural centers that drew tourists from across the globe, and luxury condominiums where the city's elite lived. My life was a meticulously crafted blueprint. My wife, Maria, was the polished cornerstone of our social life, a woman whose grace was as effortless as it was captivating. My children, Ethan and Olivia, were my proudest creations, brilliant, ambitious, destined for greatness. We were a family from a magazine cover, a testament to the American dream I had built, brick by expensive brick. The fall began with a partnership I should never have trusted. A new venture, a visionary project in a new city, promised to be my magnum opus. It was supposed to be the capstone of my career, the one project that would define me for generations. The initial investment was colossal, and I poured everything I had into it, my life savings, the firm's capital, even taking a second mortgage on our sprawling suburban home. My partner, a smooth-talking charlatan named Marcus, painted a picture of a new future, a technological marvel that would change the industry. But Marcus was a mirage, and the project was a house of cards built on inflated projections and fraudulent contracts. The collapse was swift and brutal. The news broke like a dam, a flood of headlines and legal documents. The public scandal was a firestorm, accusations of negligence, of recklessness. Marcus vanished with the funds, leaving me to face the legal and financial fallout. My empire, once so solid, crumbled into a pile of debts and lawsuits. I was forced to declare bankruptcy, to sell everything I had worked for, to liquidate my life. The sleek office on the top floor of the Sterling Tower was cleared out, its glass walls no longer reflecting the city, but my own shattered image. That was when the silence began. The first call I made was to my son, Ethan, a hotshot lawyer in Manhattan. I explained the situation, the lawsuits, the financial ruin. His response was a clinical assessment of liability, devoid of any emotional warmth. "I'm sorry, Dad. It's a bad look. My firm has to be careful with its reputation." The line went dead. "No, I'm sorry, how are you?" "No, what can I do, huh?" Just the cold reality of a man who valued his career over his father. I called my daughter Olivia, a successful art curator in Chicago. I told her the same story, the same desperate plea for understanding. She was more direct. "Dad, this is embarrassing. Everyone at work knows. I'm getting questions. I can't be associated with this kind of failure. I have a life to protect." The word failure hung in the air like a noxious gas. It wasn't just the money, it was the shame. The failure wasn't a business mistake to them, it was a character flaw. My siblings, the ones I had helped through college, the ones whose children I had paid for, the ones I had always been there for, vanished into the ether. Their phone calls went unanswered, their emails bounced back. My own brother, David, who I had bailed out of a bad business deal a decade ago, changed his number. I tried to see them, to explain, but their doors were locked, their faces hidden behind a curtain of indifference. My wife Maria didn't leave me in a dramatic storm of anger. She left with a quiet, polite finality, taking the remnants of our life with her. The house, the cars, the fine art, it all went. "I can't live like this, Daniel," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "It's not the life I signed up for. I wasn't just broke, I was an orphan of my own making. The man who had been the pillar of his family, the provider, the patriarch, was now a ghost. My existence, once so central, was now a source of embarrassment and inconvenience. I moved into a small, grimy studio apartment on the wrong side of town, the kind of place I would have never looked at twice before. The sound of the city wasn't the vibrant hum of commerce anymore. It was the wail of sirens and the distant rumble of the subway. I looked at my reflection in the smudged window pane, a man I didn't recognize, hollowed out by loss and betrayal. The expensive suits were gone, replaced by a tattered t-shirt and sweatpants. The confident glint in my eyes was replaced by a dull, defeated gaze. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones, a kind of existential loneliness that was more painful than any physical ailment. I had lost everything, but the most profound loss was the illusion of my family's love. It was a conditional love, built on the foundation of my success. When that foundation crumbled, so did the facade of their affection. In the wreckage of my life, I found a cold, hard truth. My family didn't love me for who I was. They loved me for what I provided, and now I provided nothing. I was a stain on their perfect, curated lives. I was the rock bottom they pretended didn't exist. I sat there, the bottle of whiskey a heavy weight in my hand, and wondered what the point of it all was. I had spent my entire life building, creating, providing, and in the end it was all for nothing. The silence of the apartment was deafening, a monument to my solitude. The phone remained silent. No one called, no one checked in. They had successfully erased me from their lives, a forgotten chapter in a book they were eager to finish. My life, once a testament to ambition, was now a cautionary tale. And I, the main character, was left to rot in the final desolate chapter. My days blurred into a monotonous cycle of waking up and wishing I hadn't. The small apartment, a single room with a kitchenette and a bathroom that smelled of mildew, became my prison. The world outside, a vibrant, bustling metropolis, was a foreign land. I was a ghost in my own city, haunting the same streets I had once built up, but no longer belonging to them. My former life was a distant memory, a movie I had once watched and could no longer remember the ending of. The first few weeks were a hazy blur of denial and anger. I tried to rationalize their behavior. They were busy, they were hurt too. The scandal was hard on everyone. But with each passing day, the excuses wore thin, replaced by a bitter truth. They didn't care. Not about me, not about my well-being. They cared about their own convenience, their own social standing. My existence was a liability, a stain on the polished veneer of their lives. I started drinking, not for pleasure, but for oblivion. The whiskey was a cheap, effective anesthetic, dulling the sharp edges of my despair. I would drink until the loneliness was a manageable hum, until the memories of my former life were just faint echoes in the distance. My physical appearance reflected my inner state. My tailored clothes were long gone, replaced by whatever mismatched, unwashed things I could find. My once carefully groomed beard was now a scraggly mess, and my hair, which had always been a distinguished silver, was now just a wild, unkempt mane. The mirrors I used to preen in were now sources of disgust. I saw a man who had given up, a man whose ambition had been swallowed by a black hole of failure. I tried to reach out again, driven by a flicker of hope. I sent an email to Ethan, a simple message asking how he was. No response. I left a voicemail for Olivia, not mentioning the money or the scandal, just asking if we could talk. She never called back. The silence was more painful than any argument could have been. It was the absolute, final rejection, a confirmation that I was no longer a person to them, just an unfortunate event they had to move on from. My children had become strangers, bound to me only by a DNA they seemed to regret. I'd walk the streets for hours, a man without a purpose. I'd pass by my old office building, the glass gleaming in the sun, a monument to a life I no longer lived. I'd see couples my age, laughing over coffee, families with children playing in the park. Each happy sight was a stab to my heart, a painful reminder of what I had lost, of the family who had abandoned me. The city, once my canvas, was now a gallery of my regrets. The rain, a frequent visitor to the Pacific Northwest in the autumn, felt like a personal sadness, mirroring my own inner gloom. It was a cold, miserable drizzle that seemed to seep into my bones, a constant reminder of my physical and emotional desolation. One afternoon, as I was sitting on a park bench, hunched over a cup of terrible coffee, a woman walked up to me. She was older, with lines around her eyes that spoke of experience, not age. She had a kind, tired face I knew instantly. It was Sarah, my ex-wife, my first wife. We had been married for 12 years, a lifetime ago before I had become the ambitious architect, before I had met Maria. We had been young and poor, building our lives from scratch. She was the woman who had helped me through my first few years of struggling, the one who had believed in my dreams when no one else did. I had left her for Maria, for a life of prestige and power. It was a decision I had justified for years as a necessary step for my career. She didn't say a word. She just sat down on the bench a few feet away, her presence a quiet, unnerving reality. I was surprised. Our divorce had been amicable, but we hadn't spoken in over 15 years. The last time I saw her was at our son's college graduation, a brief, polite exchange. Now here she was. She didn't look at me with pity or judgment. She looked at me with a silent, knowing sadness, as if she was seeing not a broken man, but the boy she had once loved. I expected a lecture, a litany of I told you so's or a question about my disgrace, but she said nothing. She just pulled a small bag from her tote and handed it to me. Inside were a couple of sandwiches and a bottle of water. "I saw you from my car," she said, her voice soft and low. "You looked like you could use this." Her words were simple, but they landed with the force of a physical blow. She saw me, not the broken-down failure, but the man, Daniel. The gesture of a simple meal was more meaningful than all the empty words of my family. I was so used to being invisible, to being a non-entity, that this act of recognition felt like a miracle. I took the bag from her, my hands shaking. I couldn't speak. I wanted to thank her, to apologize for everything, for the way I had left, for the life I had chosen after her, but the words were stuck in my throat, choked by shame and disbelief. She didn't wait for my thanks. She just got up and walked away, her quiet presence leaving an echo in the silence. The sandwiches were simple, turkey and cheese, but they were the first real food I had eaten in days. The water tasted like salvation. In that moment, sitting on a cold park bench, the rain still falling, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in months, a tiny spark of hope, a fragile connection to the world I had lost. My family had abandoned me, but the one person I had wronged had come back to offer a lifeline. I saw her a week later. She was standing outside my building, a modest 2-story walk-up with peeling paint and overflowing garbage cans. My stomach twisted with a mix of shame and surprise. I thought our park bench encounter was a one-off, a random act of kindness from a woman who was too good for the world. Seeing her again, waiting for me in the rain, was a different kind of reality check. She was holding a box, a sturdy cardboard box that looked too heavy for her. I walked up to her, my voice a raspy whisper from disuse. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" She didn't beat around the bush. "I'm taking you to the market. You need groceries, Daniel." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. She saw the empty cabinets, the lack of food, the desperation that I tried to hide beneath layers of dirt and despair. I wanted to protest, to tell her I didn't need her charity, to cling to the last shreds of my broken pride. But the words died on my lips. My pride was a fragile thing, worn down by weeks of hunger and humiliation. I stood there, frozen in my tattered clothes, while she held the box. "It's too heavy for me to carry alone. You can at least help me with that." The words were a gentle challenge, a way to give me purpose, to make me a participant instead of just a recipient. I took the box, and it was indeed heavy. Inside were cleaning supplies, detergent, soap, sponges, garbage bags. It wasn't just about food, it was about cleaning up the physical mess that was a reflection of my inner turmoil. We drove in her small, sensible sedan to a local supermarket, a place a far cry from the gourmet stores Maria and I used to frequent. The fluorescent lights of the store were jarring, a stark contrast to the dim grey world I had been living in. I was a spectacle. I knew it. A man who looked like he had been living on the streets, pushing a cart through aisles of perfect organized food. I kept my head down, avoiding the eyes of the other shoppers. I felt like a criminal, a fraud, a man unworthy of such normalcy. Sarah, however, was a calming presence. She didn't hover. She didn't fuss. She just methodically put items in the cart, her movements efficient and practiced. She put in things I hadn't even thought of, things I had forgotten I needed. Fresh fruit, vegetables, lean meat. She was building a foundation for a healthy life while I was still contemplating my self-destruction. There was a quiet strength in her actions, a silent refusal to see me as a lost cause. As we were in the checkout line, I finally found my voice. "Sarah, you don't have to do this. I'll pay you back, She cut me off, her eyes fixed on the cashier. "Don't talk about money, Daniel. You're my friend. This is what friends do." Her words were a balm, a stark contrast to my family's transactional view of relationships. She didn't see me as a debit or a credit. She saw me as a person. The concept was so foreign, so deeply unsettling, that I felt a lump form in my throat. She drove me back to my apartment, a silent companion. The car was quiet, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was a comfortable one, filled with the weight of our shared history. She didn't bring up the past, not the good times, and especially not the bad ones. She didn't ask about Maria or the kids. She just existed in the present, a grounding force in my chaotic world. We carried the groceries up the 2 flights of stairs to my apartment. The smell of mildew and stale air hit us the moment I opened the door. The sight of the unmade bed, the pile of dirty clothes, the empty bottles on the floor was a wave of shame. I braced myself for her reaction, for the disgust in her eyes, but she just looked around, her gaze calm. "Okay," she said, her voice matter of fact. "Let's get this place cleaned up." I was stunned. "Sarah, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do," she said, taking the cleaning supplies from the box. "You can't heal in a place like this. Your mind and your body are a mess. We'll start with the apartment and we'll go from there." She didn't make it about me being a helpless failure. She made it a project. She was an architect of a different kind, rebuilding not a skyscraper, but a man. She handed me a broom and a dustpan. "You get the floors, I'll start on the kitchen." For the next 2 hours we worked in silence. The sound of sweeping, of scrubbing, of moving furniture was a symphony of small victories. We didn't talk about my past mistakes, my family's betrayal, or my current state of ruin. We talked about practical things, where to put the garbage, how to clean the stubborn stain on the counter, the best way to organize the food. With each completed task, with each corner we cleaned, I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible shift inside me. The weight on my shoulders felt a little lighter. The air in the apartment felt a little fresher. When we were done, the apartment was still humble, still small, but it was clean. It no longer felt like a grave. It felt like a space to live. She didn't stay long after that. She just looked around, a small, satisfied smile on her face. "See? Better, right? Now you eat something and get some rest. I'll come back in a couple of days." She left before I could properly thank her. I sat on my newly made bed, the smell of fresh linen and disinfectant a pleasant surprise. The food in the refrigerator was a promise of nourishment. For the first time in months I felt a sense of purpose. It wasn't about building a new life yet. It was about surviving the current one. Sarah didn't give me money or a new job. She gave me something more profound, a reason to live, a small, simple act of kindness that shattered the darkness of my self-pity and shame. She didn't see me as a failure. She saw me as someone worthy of being saved, and in her eyes I started to believe it myself. Sarah's visits became a regular grounding force in my life. She'd come by a few times a week, always with a purpose. Sometimes she'd bring a home-cooked meal, something simple but nourishing, a far cry from the instant noodles and stale bread I'd been living on. Other times, she'd bring a book from the library or a newspaper, anything to pull me out of the stagnant pool of my own misery. She didn't push or prod. She just offered a quiet presence and a gentle nudge toward a healthier existence. One evening, after we had finished a dinner of chicken and vegetables, she looked at me with an expression that was both serious and empathetic. "You need to talk to someone, Daniel. Not me. A professional or a group." My immediate reaction was resistance. "I don't need a therapist, Sarah. I just need a job. I need to get my life back." The words felt hollow, even to me. "You won't get your life back until you confront what led to this," she said gently, gesturing at the half-empty bottle of whiskey on the counter. "It wasn't just a business deal, Daniel. It was something in you that cracked. And you need to figure out what that was before you can rebuild." She was right. The failed business was a symptom, not the cause. The cracks in my foundation had been there for a long time. Cracks of ego, of pride, of a life built on material success instead of real connection. The alcoholism wasn't just a reaction to the failure. It was a way to numb the deeper, more profound pain, of losing my family. The next day she brought me a flyer for a local Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. The thought of it filled me with dread. The idea of sitting in a room with strangers, bearing my soul, was anathema to everything I was. I was a man who had built his career on being in control, on projecting an image of strength and success. Admitting my weakness to a group of people I didn't know felt like the ultimate humiliation. "I can wait outside for you," she offered, her voice calm and steady. "No one has to know. You don't have to say anything, just listen." I had no good reason to say no. I was a broken man with nothing left to lose. So I went. The meeting was in a drab community center room, filled with mismatched chairs and the smell of stale coffee. The people were a diverse mix, men and women, old and young, all carrying their own burdens. They weren't the polished, successful people I was used to. They were raw, real, and vulnerable. I sat in the back, a silent observer. I felt like a fraud. My problems, I told myself, were different. I wasn't some poor soul who had lost everything to the bottle. I was Daniel Sterling, the architect. My problems were complex, rooted in betrayal and financial ruin. But as I listened to them share their stories, I realized my struggles weren't so unique. The stories of loss, of betrayal, of losing family and jobs to the slow, creeping darkness of addiction resonated with a chilling familiarity. A man named Tom, a former carpenter, talked about how he lost his family home because he couldn't stop drinking. A young woman, Maria, spoke about her struggle with shame and how it led her to isolate herself from everyone who loved her. The stories were different, but the core emotion was the same, the pain of self-destruction and the isolation that came with it. For weeks I went to the meetings, sitting in the back, a silent, cynical presence. I refused to speak. I felt like I was above it all. I was an observer, not a participant. Sarah continued to drive me, to wait outside, a silent anchor in my storm. She never pressured me, never asked what I thought. She just offered the support and the space I needed. One rainy Tuesday, a woman in her late 60s stood up to share. Her name was Helen. Her story was heartbreaking. She had lost her husband, her daughter, and her grandson in a car accident caused by a drunk driver. The driver was her own son. The grief and the guilt were a crushing weight. She talked about how she turned to alcohol to numb the pain, to forget the constant image of her family in the wreckage. Her story hit me like a ton of bricks. My family was still alive. They had simply chosen to leave me. They hadn't died in an accident. They had walked away and I had let them. Her pain, a pain so much greater and more profound than my own, was a mirror reflecting my self-pity. I'd been so focused on their betrayal that I hadn't considered my own role in it. I had built a life on a flimsy foundation of success and money, and when it all came crashing down, they were just as lost as I was, just as unprepared. They didn't know how to relate to the real broken version of me because I had never let them see him. The next day I didn't see Sarah. I took the subway myself. I walked into the meeting, not as a cynical observer, but as a man seeking help. The room was the same. The people were the same. But I was different. I sat down, my heart pounding in my chest. I waited for my turn, the words I wanted to say forming in my mind. The old Daniel Sterling, the one who was a master of his own destiny, was gone. In his place was a man who was finally ready to admit he was powerless. When the time came, I stood up, my voice shaky. "My name is Daniel," I said, the words feeling foreign and heavy on my tongue. "And I'm an alcoholic." The first step, the hardest step. I didn't talk about my business, my family, my scandal. I just talked about the loneliness, the despair, the feeling of being invisible. I spoke about the deep, dark well of shame I had been trying to drown in. I spoke for 10 minutes, a torrent of words I had held inside for so long. When I was finished, I felt a kind of exhaustion, a profound relief. After the meeting, Tom, the carpenter, came up to me. He put a hand on my shoulder. "Welcome," he said, his eyes filled with understanding. "It takes a lot of guts to get up here the first time. You did good." His simple words of validation meant more to me than any praise I had ever received for my architectural achievements. I hadn't built a skyscraper, but I had taken a step toward building a new life. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt hope. My sobriety became the new foundation I was building my life on. With each day that passed without a drink, I felt a little stronger, a little more grounded. The fog in my brain began to lift, replaced by a painful but necessary clarity. The first thing I saw was the mess I had made of my life, not just financially, but emotionally. The drinking had been a way to numb the pain, but now that the numbness was gone, the pain was a raw and constant ache. The meetings at the community center became my sanctuary. The stories of others became a mirror for my own. I started to see the parallels between my own life and the lives of the people around me. The common thread wasn't just addiction. It was shame, isolation, and a deep-seated fear of not being enough. I began to understand that my success had been a shield, a way to protect myself from the world and from my own insecurities. The failure wasn't just a business mistake. It was the shattering of that shield, leaving me exposed and vulnerable. I was sitting in my small, clean apartment one afternoon, a cup of coffee in my hand, when a memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was a perfect sunny day years ago. I was in our sprawling suburban backyard, the one with the meticulously manicured lawn and the swimming pool. Ethan, my son, was maybe 10, and he was trying to build a treehouse in the ancient oak tree. It was a disaster. The wood was crooked, the nails were bent, and the roof was lopsided. He was frustrated, on the verge of tears. I walked up to him, and instead of helping him fix it, I took over. "That's not how you do it, son," I said, my voice filled with the casual authority of a man who always knew better. I grabbed his hammer and saw, and in less than an hour, I had built a perfect miniature treehouse, a gleaming testament to my own skill. Ethan looked at it with a mix of awe and disappointment. "It's perfect, Dad," he said, but the words felt hollow. I didn't realize it then, but I had taken his project, his effort, and replaced it with my own perfection. I had robbed him of the joy of creation, of the satisfaction of building something with his own hands, however imperfect. I did the same with Olivia. She was a talented painter, a girl who saw the world in vibrant colors and abstract shapes. She showed me a canvas once, a bold, beautiful expression of her emotions. I looked at it and saw an investment opportunity. "That's good, Liv," I said, "but if you really want to make it, you need to paint things people will buy. I know some gallery owners. I can get you an exhibition, but you have to do something more marketable." I had turned her passion into a business transaction, an extension of my own ambition. I never saw the beautiful art. I saw the potential for profit. The memories came in a flood, each one a painful reminder of my past mistakes. I wasn't a bad father, not in the traditional sense. I provided everything. I paid for the best schools, the best vacations, the best of everything. But I was never truly present. I was a patriarch, a provider, a problem solver, but I wasn't a father, not in the way they needed. I had been so focused on building my empire that I had forgotten to build a family. I had given them a life of privilege, but I had never given them a chance to fail, to struggle, to build their own lives. I had always been there to fix their problems, to show them a better way, to make everything perfect. My love was a kind of smothering perfectionism that left no room for their own growth. That's why they had abandoned me. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that my failure was an inconvenient truth that exposed the fragility of the entire family structure. They had built their identities on the foundation of my success, on being the children of the great architect Daniel Sterling. When that foundation crumbled, so did their sense of self. They didn't know how to handle a father who was a failure, a man who was no longer perfect. It was a betrayal of the life I had promised them, a life of flawless success and endless resources. My failure was a mirror that showed them their own deepest fears, and they couldn't bear to look. The realization was a gut punch. It wasn't just about them, it was about me. I had been so busy feeling sorry for myself, so consumed by their betrayal, that I hadn't seen my own role in the family's demise. The public scandal was just the final brick that toppled a house that was already leaning. The real tragedy wasn't the loss of my fortune. It was the loss of a family that I never truly knew how to connect with in the first place. I sat there, the weight of the realization a heavy burden on my shoulders. I had spent so long blaming them for their coldness, for their calculated rejection. But I had been the one who had built a transactional relationship, a family built on the exchange of money for obedience, of power for respect. I had been a king in a kingdom I had built, but I was also a lonely ruler, surrounded by people who were more subjects than family. The bitter taste of my own hypocrisy was a new and far more painful kind of despair. I called Sarah, my voice thick with emotion. I told her about the memories, about the painful realization. She listened patiently, her quiet presence on the other end of the line a comfort. "It takes a lot of courage to see your own mistakes, Daniel," she said, her voice soft. "You're not the man you were. You're becoming a better one." Her words were a lifeline, a confirmation that this painful, difficult process was worth it. I had been looking for a way to get my old life back, but in that moment, I realized my old life was the problem. The real work was in building a new one, brick by brick, not with steel and glass, but with humility and a profound, painful honesty. With each passing day, the new foundation of my life solidified. The meetings, the painful self-reflection, the steady, unwavering support of Sarah, it was all chipping away at the hard shell of my ego. The world outside my apartment no longer felt like a hostile landscape of my past failures. It felt like a place of possibility, a place where I could start over, not as the great Daniel Sterling, but as just Daniel. One evening, Sarah and I were sitting in my small kitchen, drinking coffee. The silence between us wasn't awkward anymore. It was comfortable, filled with a new kind of intimacy that had nothing to do with romance and everything to do with shared understanding. She had been there for me at my absolute lowest, and I had seen her not as the woman I had left, but as the kind, compassionate person she had always been. "I've been thinking a lot about the past," I said, breaking the silence, "about why I left you and about what happened with Maria and the kids." She listened, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath. I was a different man back then. I was so consumed by ambition. I thought that success was the ultimate measure of a man. You were the girl I started with, the one who believed in my dreams, but you weren't the one who could stand by me at the top. I needed a trophy wife, someone who looked the part, someone who could play the social game. The words felt like a confession, a cleansing of my soul. I left you for a life of perfection, and in the end that perfection was a lie. Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a quiet sadness. "You weren't a bad person, Daniel. You were just a man who lost his way. You let the world define you, and you lost sight of who you really were. I wasn't the woman you needed then, but you weren't the man I needed either. We both made choices. The difference is, my choices didn't lead to this kind of ruin." Her words were a stark, honest assessment of the past. There was no bitterness, no anger, just a quiet acceptance of the way things were. Her humility was a lesson for me. She hadn't held on to the bitterness of my betrayal. She had moved on, built a good life for herself, and was now here offering a hand to the very man who had once cast her aside. Her capacity for forgiveness was a kind of strength I had never seen before. The conversation shifted, and I found myself talking about my children. I told her about the memories that had been flooding back, about the treehouse and the painting. I was never a father to them, Sarah. I was a manager. I managed their lives, their problems, their successes. I never gave them a chance to just be. I think that's why they left. My failure was too much for them because I had never taught them how to handle their own. A single tear rolled down my cheek, a testament to the raw, emotional pain I was finally allowing myself to feel. Sarah didn't say anything. She just reached across the table and put her hand over mine. It was a simple, comforting gesture that spoke volumes. In that moment, I realized that true strength wasn't about building skyscrapers or making millions. It was about facing your own truth, your own weaknesses, and your own mistakes. It was about a woman who had every right to be angry, but who chose to be kind instead. The next morning, I woke up with a new sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances. I was an agent of change. I had a long way to go, but the path was clear. I needed to rebuild my life, not just financially, but spiritually. I had to become the man I was supposed to be, not the man I thought the world wanted me to be. I went to my weekly meeting that evening. I spoke again, but this time, My voice was stronger, more confident. I talked about the realization I had, the understanding of my own role in my downfall. I talked about how my ambition had been a kind of addiction, a need to constantly prove my worth to a world that was always demanding more. The other members of the group listened with silent understanding. They weren't judging me. They were a community of fellow travelers, all on the same road to redemption. After the meeting, Tom, the carpenter, and I had coffee. "You're a good man, Daniel," he said, looking at me with honest eyes. "It took a lot for you to get where you are. A lot of us get sober, but we never face the real reasons why we drank in the first place. You're doing the hard work." His words were a powerful affirmation. I wasn't an architect anymore, but I was building something far more important: my own character. I called Sarah later that night. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for everything." "You're welcome, Daniel," she said, "but you're the one who's doing the work. I'm just here to hold the light." Her words resonated deep within me. I was the one doing the work. The recovery, the emotional reckoning, the difficult conversations with myself, it was all my own doing. She had simply been the catalyst, the one person who had been there when no one else was. The old Daniel Sterling was gone, and I didn't miss him. The man who was replacing him was a man who knew what it felt like to fail, what it felt like to be abandoned, and what it felt like to be saved by a single act of kindness. That man, I realized, was far more resilient, far more real, and far more deserving of a second chance. My life was no longer defined by the absence of things I had lost. It was now defined by the presence of things I was gaining. I was sober. I was working through my past, and I was building a relationship with Sarah that was deeper and more meaningful than anything I had ever known. But the practicalities of life remained. I had to eat, I had to pay rent, and I had to find a way to make a living. My reputation was in tatters. The name Daniel Sterling was a punchline in architectural circles, a cautionary tale of hubris and failure. I couldn't get a job in a firm, not even as an intern. My skills, once so sought after, were now a liability. I was a man with a resume that was a liability, a past that was a public disgrace. Sarah, ever the pragmatist, saw the problem and came up with a solution. "You can't work for anyone else, Daniel. You'll have to work for yourself." The idea seemed ridiculous. I had no capital, no clients, and no confidence. "You can start small," she said, her voice filled with a quiet certainty. "You're a brilliant architect. You can do small drafting jobs, maybe some consulting for people who are renovating their homes. There are people who don't care about your past, just your talent." The idea was humbling. I, who had designed multi-million-dollar skyscrapers, was now being asked to draw up plans for a new kitchen or a bathroom remodel. But the alternative was living in my one-room apartment, a perpetual ghost of my former self. So I agreed. Sarah, through her network of friends and acquaintances, found me my first client, a kind, older woman named Eleanor who wanted to remodel her small suburban home. She didn't know who I was, or if she did, she didn't care. She just needed a good, affordable architect. I met Eleanor at her home, a cozy but dated bungalow. The house was filled with personal touches, with memories of a life well lived. She wanted to open up the kitchen, add a sunroom, and create a master bedroom with an accessible bathroom. The project was small, but it was a challenge. I had to forget everything I knew about grand designs and futuristic materials. I had to focus on a new kind of architecture, a human architecture, one that was about creating a space that was functional, beautiful, and emotionally resonant for a single person. The work was difficult. My hands, used to pushing a computer mouse and signing documents, were now calloused and sore from drawing and measuring. I spent hours at Eleanor's home, meticulously measuring every wall, every window, every corner. I listened to her stories about her late husband, about their children, about her dreams for the house. I wasn't just an architect, I was a listener, a confidant, a kind of therapist for a woman who just wanted her home to feel right. The work was slow, and the pay was a fraction of what I was used to, but with each line I drew, with each detail I added, I felt a kind of satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. I was using my skills for something real, for something that had a tangible impact on a single person's life. It wasn't about building a monument to my ego, it was about building a home for someone else's memories. I also found a part-time job at a local hardware store, a place where I could get my hands dirty and learn about the materials I was designing with. The work was simple and physical. I stocked shelves, helped people find the right tools, and gave advice on small renovation projects. The people I worked with were not architects or investors. They were just regular people, trying to make a living, trying to build a life. They didn't know my past and they didn't care. They just saw a man who was willing to work hard and learn. One afternoon, I was helping a young couple pick out some paint colors for their first apartment. They were so excited, so full of hope. They were building their life, their future, with their own hands. It was a stark contrast to the way I had lived, a life of paying others to do the work, of buying my way to a perfect life. I looked at their faces, filled with a kind of innocent joy, and I felt a pang of regret. I had lost the simple joy of building things with my own hands. I had lost the sense of connection that came from honest work. But now, in this small local hardware store, I was finding it again. The months passed, and I was making progress. I was no longer a ghost haunting my own city. I was a man with a purpose, with a small but growing business. I was paying my own rent, buying my own groceries. I was standing on my own 2 feet, not as a successful architect, but as a sober, honest man who was starting over. It was a difficult, humbling journey, but with each step I was shedding the past, shedding the ego, shedding the man who had lost everything. The money was a fraction of what I had before, but the sense of accomplishment, the feeling of being in control of my own life, was worth more than any skyscraper I had ever built. My new life, though humble, had a rhythm. The mornings started with a cup of coffee and a moment of gratitude. The days were filled with work, either at Eleanor's bungalow or at the hardware store. The evenings were for meetings or for a quiet dinner with Sarah, who had become the most important person in my life. The storm of my past was a distant memory, a kind of dark history I was finally at peace with. But you can't outrun your past forever. It always finds a way to catch up. I was on my lunch break at the hardware store, sitting on a bench outside eating a sandwich. The sun was out for a change, a warm welcome presence after a long, rainy winter. I was just enjoying the moment, the simple pleasure of the sun on my face, when a car pulled up to the curb. It was a sleek, expensive European sedan, the kind of car I used to drive. The driver's side window rolled down, and a face I knew and loved, but had not seen in a long time, looked out at me. It was my son, Ethan. My heart hammered against my ribs. I hadn't seen him in over a year, not since the phone call that ended with his cold assessment of my liability. He looked just like I remembered, perfectly groomed in an expensive suit, his face a mask of professional detachment. He didn't look like my son. He looked like an attorney on his lunch break. "Dad," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. He didn't say, "How are you?" or, "I've been looking for you." He just said my name, as if it was a file he had been asked to review. I stood up, my hands trembling slightly. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "I was in the area. A client of mine mentioned seeing you." I didn't believe it. His eyes swept over my clothes, the simple jeans and the hardware store t-shirt. His gaze was a kind of inspection, a cold clinical assessment of my failure. "You're a handyman?" The word was filled with a kind of patronizing pity that was more insulting than any direct insult could have been. My pride, the same pride that had led to my downfall, flared up. "I'm a consultant," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I'm helping people with their home renovation projects. I'm also working here." He just looked at me, a silent judgment in his eyes. "You lost everything, Dad. Why are you doing this? You could be living with us. We have a guest room." The offer was a shock. My heart, which had been on a roller coaster of emotions, plummeted. It wasn't a genuine offer of help. It was a solution to a problem. My existence was an inconvenience, a source of embarrassment. By living with them, I would be hidden away, a kept man, no longer a public spectacle. He wasn't offering to help me. He was offering to help himself. He was offering to clean up the stain I had become. "I can't do that, Ethan," I said, my voice soft but firm. "I'm not a guest. I'm a man who's rebuilding his life." He sighed, an impatient sound. This is so typical of you, Dad. Always doing things the hard way. Look at you. You've lost everything. Your reputation, your money, everything. You're a joke. You don't have to live like this. Just let me help you." His words hit me like a physical blow, a joke. That's what I was to him. The man who had once been his hero was now a punchline. He wasn't seeing a father. He was seeing a cautionary tale. He was seeing a failure. The realization was painful, but also clarifying. He hadn't changed. He was still the same person he was a year ago, a person who couldn't see past the surface, who couldn't see the man beneath the title. I looked at him, at his perfect suit, his perfect car, his perfect soulless life, and in that moment, I felt a wave of pity for him, not for myself. He was still a slave to the very system that had destroyed me. He was still living his life based on what other people thought, on what looked good on the outside. He was just a younger version of the man I used to be. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I can't do that. I have to do this myself. This is my journey. This is my recovery." He looked at me for a long moment, a flicker of something, maybe disappointment, maybe frustration, crossing his face. Then, without a word, he rolled up the window and drove away. The sleek sedan disappeared around the corner, leaving me alone on the bench, a man in a hardware store t-shirt, clutching a half-eaten sandwich. The encounter reopened old wounds, but it also solidified my resolve. I had spent so long trying to get back to the life I had before, trying to get back into the good graces of my family. But now, I saw that the life I had before wasn't a life at all. It was a gilded cage, and my family wasn't a family. It was a collection of people who had been trained to value success over everything else. My new life, though difficult and humble, was real. It was mine. It was a life built not on the shifting sands of public opinion, but on the solid ground of my own integrity. I was no longer a punchline. I was a man who had hit rock bottom and had found the strength to rebuild himself, not with money, but with humility and hard work. The encounter with Ethan left a deep mark on me. The sting of his words, the casual cruelty of his judgment lingered for days. It was a painful reminder of what I had lost and what I had become in the eyes of my own son. But with the pain came a new kind of clarity. My family wasn't going to change. They were still trapped in the world of appearances and status that I had helped create for them. They couldn't see my recovery because they couldn't see past my failure. I knew I needed to talk to them, not to ask for forgiveness or for a second chance, but to offer them something I had never given them before, a sincere apology for my past emotional neglect. I knew it wouldn't change anything, but I needed to do it for myself. I needed to say the words, to own my mistakes, to close that chapter of my life. I found Olivia's email address and sent her a short, simple message. I didn't mention money or my current life. I just said I wanted to talk, to apologize for some things in the past. To my surprise, she responded. She agreed to meet me at a neutral location, a small coffee shop in the city. The place was a far cry from the fancy restaurants where we used to dine, but it felt right. I arrived early, my hands clammy with nerves. I had rehearsed the words in my head 100 times, but now they felt clumsy and inadequate. When she walked in, I barely recognized her. She was thinner, her face was strained, and there were dark circles under her eyes. She was still beautiful, but a kind of brittle, unhappy beauty. She was wearing an expensive dress, but it looked more like armor than clothing. We ordered coffee, and the silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken resentment and pain. I was a stranger to her, and she was a stranger to me. She was a woman I had raised, a woman I had loved, but I didn't know her anymore, and in that moment I realized I never really had. I had known her as my daughter, the art curator, the successful one. I had never known her as just Olivia. "Olivia," I started, my voice shaky. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I wanted to say I'm sorry." She looked at me, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "For what, Dad? For losing all your money? For embarrassing the family? For leaving us with nothing?" Her words were like daggers, each one a testament to the pain she had been holding on to. "For all of that," I said, "but mostly for this. I gestured between us, for never being a real father to you, for always being the man who fixed things, who provided, who knew best. I never gave you a chance to be yourself. I turned your art into a business transaction. I never just saw you, Olivia. I just saw the daughter of Daniel Sterling, and I'm so sorry for that." The words came out in a rush, a torrent of a decade's worth of regret. She just looked at me, her expression a mix of shock and confusion. "I don't understand," she said, her voice softer. "You were always a great dad. You gave us everything." "I gave you everything but the one thing you needed most," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't give you my time. I didn't give you my heart. I gave you my money. And when the money was gone, there was nothing left." I paused, looking at her, hoping she would see the truth in my eyes. The failure wasn't the business, Olivia. The failure was me. I was so busy building my empire that I let my family crumble. You didn't abandon me. I abandoned you a long time ago. Tears welled up in her eyes, a kind of raw, painful emotion that I had never seen from her before. The armor of her expensive dress seemed to crack. "I don't know what to say," she said, her voice a whisper. "I'm not used to this." "Neither am I admitted, a bitter smile on my face. "I'm not the man I was. I'm trying to be a better one. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I just needed you to hear it. I needed to say it." We sat in silence for a long time, the unspoken words between us as loud as any shouting match. I didn't ask her about her life, about her career, about the things that had always been the main topic of our conversations. I just sat there, a man who was finally painfully being honest with his daughter. She didn't offer to help me or to make amends. She just looked at me, a flicker of something in her eyes that wasn't resentment or shame, but a kind of dawning understanding. When she left, she didn't hug me. She didn't say goodbye. She just got up and walked out of the coffee shop, leaving me alone at the table. I felt a profound sense of sadness, but also a kind of peace. I had said my piece. The burden of guilt and regret, a burden I had carried for so long, felt a little lighter. The family I had before was gone, but the chance to be a real, honest man had just begun. I had hit rock bottom, and in the ashes of my old life, I was finally finding a new, more meaningful kind of wealth. The final piece of my old life, the one I thought I needed to reconnect with, was now a closed chapter. The meeting with Olivia and the earlier encounter with Ethan solidified my belief that my path forward was not about reconciliation with a past that was based on lies. It was about building a future based on honesty and genuine connection. My life continued to take shape, brick by brick. My small consulting business grew. Eleanor's bungalow was a success, and she referred me to her friends. The work was fulfilling in a way that building a skyscraper never was. It was personal, intimate, and it had a direct impact on people's lives. My work at the hardware store gave me a sense of community, a connection to a world that was real and grounded. But the most significant part of my life was the one that had been there all along, the one I had left behind. Sarah. She wasn't just a friend or a confidant anymore. She was a partner, a companion, a person who had seen me at my worst and had still stayed. Our relationship had no pretense, no past baggage. It was built on the foundation of shared struggle, of mutual respect, and of a quiet, profound love that had grown from the ashes of my old life. One evening, we were sitting on a park bench, the same one where she had first found me. The rain was gone, and the sun was setting, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. It was a beautiful, peaceful evening. "You know," she said, her voice soft, "I'm proud of you, Daniel." Her words hit me with a powerful wave of emotion. I hadn't heard those words in years. My family's pride had always been conditional on my success. Sarah's pride was unconditional. She was proud of the man I had become, not for what I had accomplished, but for who I was. "I don't know where I would be without you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You gave me a second chance. You brought me back from the brink." She smiled, a kind, gentle smile that lit up her entire face. "You gave yourself a second chance, Daniel. I just opened the door. You were the one who had the courage to walk through it. You are the one who chose to get sober. You are the one who chose to rebuild your life. You are the one who chose to face the truth." She was right. I had been given a lifeline, but I was the one who had to hold on. I had been given a path, but I was the one who had to walk it. I was a different man, no longer the celebrated architect, no longer the failed patriarch. I was a man who had faced his demons, who had lost everything, and who had found a new, more meaningful life in the rubble of his old one. The phone that had once been a source of anxiety, a symbol of my family's silence, was now just a tool. It had a new number, and the only people who had it was Sarah and the few friends I had made in my new life. One day, a few weeks later, it rang. I saw the number, a number I didn't recognize. I answered it, my heart pounding slightly. It was Olivia. "Dad," she said, her voice hesitant, "I just wanted to tell you I'm painting again. Not for a gallery, just for myself. I'm painting for the first time in years." Tears welled up in my eyes. "That's wonderful, Olivia," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I didn't ask why she was calling or what she wanted, I just listened. We talked for a few minutes, not about our past, not about her career, but about her art, about her passion. It was a small, fragile conversation, but it was real. It was a connection that was not based on money or success, but on something deeper. It was a first step, a tiny bridge that might one day lead to something more. The story of my life wasn't a tragedy. It wasn't about the end of a great man. It was a story of rebirth, of a man who lost everything to find himself. My former family, the one I had built with Maria and my children, had pretended I didn't exist. They had erased me from their lives, a forgotten chapter in a book they were eager to finish. But my ex-wife Sarah, the woman I had left behind, had given me a new chance, a new beginning. She had given me a new kind of family, one based not on blood or money, but on a silent understanding, a quiet kindness, and an unconditional love that had saved me from the wreckage of my own making. I no longer yearned for the life I had lost. I was content with the life I had found. I was no longer the successful architect, but I was a man who was building a life that was finally his own, a life of purpose, of honesty, and of profound, simple joy. The final chapter of my story wasn't one of failure. It was a story of hope, a testament to the fact that even when you hit rock bottom, there is always a chance for a new beginning.